I've buried good men in that valley. I've watched grown ranchers cry over dead cattle and dry wells, and the slow arithmetic of a place that takes more than it gives. So when a city woman with paint under her fingernails handed the county a crumpled $10 bill for a heap of stone that the law once called an outlaw's hole, and waited, actually waited for her $1 in change, I figured I was watching somebody lose everything she had left, just slower than most. I was wrong about almost all of it. This is the part I keep getting wrong when I tell it. I want to make myself the smart one, the old rancher who saw it coming. I didn't see anything coming. I want to tell you I helped her out of kindness. Mostly I helped her because I couldn't stand to watch and do nothing, which is a different and lesser thing. By the time the first real snow came down off the Beartooths that winter, the kind that doesn't fall so much as arrive, like a verdict, I had stopped laughing at the $9 ruin. By Christmas, I owed my life to it. Let me start where it actually started, which is not with the woman. It's with the dollar bill in my own hand and a question I've been chewing on for 40 years. How do you measure what a place is worth? The county had its number. I had mine. She had something else entirely, something I didn't have a word for until the snow taught it to me. The auction was held in the basement of the courthouse in town, the room that smells like floor wax and old coffee and the particular boredom of government work. I went because I go to all of them. Not to buy. I haven't got the money to buy, and I haven't got the want either. I go because tax sale auctions are where you find out who's drowning, whose father died without a will, whose ranch the bank finally swallowed after 3 bad years. You learn more about a county at a tax sale than you do at a funeral, because at a funeral people lie about the dead, and at a tax sale they can't afford to lie about anything. I keep a notebook. I've kept one since 1981, a little spiral thing I buy 3 at a time at the drugstore, and I write down what sells and for what, because numbers don't sentimentalize. A man can tell himself the valley's doing fine. The notebook says different. The notebook says a quarter section that fetched 80,000 in '99 went for 19 last spring, and the buyer was a wind company in Denver that has never set a boot on the ground it owns. Anyway, that's my quirk, if you want to call it that. An old man and his ledger, sitting in the back row, scratching down the price of other people's bad years. The shelter came up last, the way the junk always does. Lot 41. The auctioneer, a soft fellow named Prout who'd rather be anywhere, read it off in a voice that already apologized for it. Lot 41. .6 acres, unimproved, the old coal dugout up County 7. No road access past the cattle guard, no water rights, structure condemned. Starting bid, $9. Somebody laughed. I think it was me. Because here's what Lot 41 was. Up in the broken country where County 7 stops pretending to be a road, there's a shelf of land against a limestone wall, and built into that wall, half cave, half masonry, the way they used to do it, is what's left of a place that Ezra Cole used to hide in back when hiding was a profession. Cole was a horse thief and a worse thing or two, dead since 1911, shot in Billings over a card game, and the dugout he'd built was the kind of place the law couldn't see from the valley floor. You could winter in it. You could watch the only approach for 2 miles. It was a good place to be a bad man. By the time the county put it up for sale, it was a roofless rectangle of cut stone and a black mouth of cave behind it, with 110 years of pack rats and collapse and forgetting piled inside. The structure condemned was generous. There was barely a structure to condemn. I'd ridden past it maybe 1,000 times pushing cattle up the high pasture, and I'd never once thought of it as anything but a place a horse might turn an ankle. $9, and nobody wanted it. Prout was already moving his eyes to close the lot, going once, the whole room praying he'd hurry, when a hand went up in the second row. A woman's hand, paint-stained, cheap silver ring. 9, she said, like it was a real number, like she'd thought about it. Prout blinked at her the way you'd blink at a deer that walked into church. We have $9 do I hear? He didn't even finish. There was nothing to hear. The gavel came down soft, almost embarrassed, and Lot 41 belonged to a woman I'd never seen before in my life. She went up to the table after and counted out the money. A 10. And then she stood there, and Prout, God love him, didn't understand, and she said, quiet, "There's $1 coming back to me." And he scrambled in the cash box and gave her a single, and she folded it into her jacket pocket like it mattered, because I'd learned it did. It mattered a great deal. She did not have a lot of dollars to be careless with. I wrote it in the notebook. Lot 41, coal dugout, $9, unknown female buyer. And under it, because I'm an old fool, I wrote, poor woman doesn't know. Her name was Mara Kessler. I learned that 2 weeks later when my truck and her truck met nose to nose on the only stretch of County 7 wide enough for one vehicle, and one of us had to back up half a mile, and she did it without being asked, which is more than I can say for most men I know. She'd parked at the cattle guard, the literal end of the drivable road, and she was hauling. That's the word, hauling. She had a pack frame on her back loaded with what looked like a tent and a sleeping bag and a 5-gallon bucket lashed on top, and she was walking the last mile and a half up to the dugout on foot because there was no other way to get there. I watched her do it from my truck for a minute, which is a shameful thing to admit, just sitting there watching a person work that hard. Then I got out. "You're the one bought Cole's place," I said, not a question. She turned around slow, careful with the weight. She was maybe 45, 50, hard to say. She had the kind of face the wind had already started working on, and her hands, I noticed her hands first, the way you notice hands on people who use them, were strong and chapped and stained at the knuckles with something blue and something rust-colored. Paint, I figured. Or old blood. With her it could have been either, I learned later. "I'm the one," she said. "You here to tell me I'm a fool?" "Wasn't planning to. Everybody else has, save you the trip." But she said it without heat. She set the pack down on the cattle guard rail, careful, and put her hands on her low back the way you do when it's been talking to you. "You ranch the valley." "The east half of it, 40 years. I nodded up the draw toward where the dugout sat invisible behind its shelf of rock. "You know there's no water up there, no road, no roof far as I recall." "I know about the roof," she said. "I'm fixing the roof." And there was something in how she said it, flat, certain, a little daring me to laugh that made me not laugh. "I'm fixing the roof." Like a person says I'm burying my husband. A thing that has to be done and will be done by the one saying it and no one else. I should have left it there. I'm not a man who collects strangers, but I'd written "poor woman doesn't know" in my notebook, and standing there I had the uncomfortable sense that she knew something I didn't. So I said, "I've got a horse and a sledge. I could pack your heavy stuff up the last mile if you want. Wouldn't cost you anything." She studied me a long beat. People up here learn to read offers because most of them have a hook in them. Whatever she saw in my face, she decided to trust it partway. "The bags of mortar," she said. "If you mean it, those are killing me." I meant it. I went home and got the horse. Here is what I understood about Mara Kessler by the end of that first day. Hauling 60-pound bags of mortar mix up a deer trail behind a horse named Dutch, while she walked alongside and told me almost nothing about herself. She had no money. Not poor mouth no money, no money. The $9 hadn't been a deal to her, it had been the budget. She'd lost something. She didn't say what and I didn't ask, but you don't end up alone at 50 hauling a pack frame up an outlaw's hole on the strength of $9 because life has been gentle with you. There was a husband somewhere in the past tense, I gathered, the way you gather these things from what's not said, from the bare ring finger that still had the pale band where a ring used to live. There'd been a house, somewhere, that wasn't hers anymore. There was a daughter she mentioned once and then didn't again, and the not again told me more than the mention. And she was, by trade, a stonemason. That was the blue and rust on her knuckles. Not blood. Stone dust and the iron stain that comes off old mortar and the particular blue of the chalk line. She'd laid stone for 30 years for other people, patios for rich folks, retaining walls, the facing on banks and churches, and somewhere in the wreck of whatever had wrecked her, she'd done the only arithmetic that made sense to her. She had no money, but she had a trade. And there was exactly one thing in the county, a person with no money and a trade in stone could buy. A ruin made of stone. It's already half built, she told me late that afternoon, the two of us standing inside the roofless rectangle while Dutch cropped grass below us. She wasn't talking to me, really. She was talking to the walls. She had her hand flat on the stone, Cole's stone, dead Ezra Cole's 110-year-old courses, laid by a horse thief who knew he might need to stop a bullet with them. Look at this. Look at how he laid this. This man knew what he was doing. These are good walls. They've stood through everything for a century with no roof on them. Everybody looks at this place and sees what's gone. She turned and looked at me, and for the first time all day there was something lit up behind her eyes. I look at it and see what's left. I didn't have an answer to that. I'm not a man who's good with the things she just said. I push cows and I keep a ledger and I bury my dead. But I remember the light going long and gold across the valley, and the swallows coming out of the cracks in Cole's walls to hunt the evening bugs, and a woman with a dead man's good stone under her hand. And I remember thinking, against my whole notebook, against 40 years of watching this country take and take, maybe. Just that maybe. I rode Dutch home in the dark, and I did not write "poor woman doesn't know" again. She moved into a tent on the shelf in front of the dugout and she went to work, and I would be lying if I said I left her alone. I didn't. I made up reasons. I had to check the high fence. I had a salt block to set. I was always somehow finding myself up County 7 to the cattle guard with the horse, and once I was there it was no trouble to pack something the last mile, and once I'd packed it there was coffee and so on. That's how it goes when you're old and your wife is 12 years gone and your kids are in cities, and you tell yourself you prefer the quiet. You don't prefer the quiet. You just got used to it. A person comes along working that hard at staying alive, and you find your feet pointed up the draw before your head's decided anything. I learned her rhythms. She worked stone in the cool of the morning and the cool of the evening, and in the hot middle of the day she'd go down into the cave part, the back of the dugout, where the limestone made a room that was 60 degrees in July, and she'd sit and sort rock. Because that was the genius of the thing, and I didn't understand it for weeks. She wasn't buying materials. She didn't have money for materials. Every stone she put in that roof, she pulled out of the collapse. A century of fallen rock, the rubble that everybody else looked at and called ruin, to her, it was a stockpile. Cole's place had paid for its own resurrection 100 years before she got there. She just had to be poor enough and stubborn enough and good enough with her hands to see it. The roof was the impossible part. You can't roof a place like that with shingles. There's no lumber to be had for free, and lumber rots and lumber burns, and she had a deep mistrust of anything that wasn't stone. So she did the thing they did in the old country, the thing she'd learned from a book and a Welshman she'd apprenticed under 30 years gone. She built a stone roof. A corbelled roof, she called it when I asked. Each course of stone laid a little inward over the one below, walls leaning in toward each other over the long axis of the room, slow, until they nearly met at the top, and the last gap closed with capstones. No beams, no nails, no wood at all. A roof that was just the walls deciding to become a ceiling, held up by nothing but its own weight and the angle of every stone and the patience of the woman who set them. It can't fall, she told me the day she explained it, because there's nothing in it that can fall. Every stone is holding every other stone down. Gravity's not the enemy, gravity's the glue. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, leaving a smear of dust. People build wrong. They build against the weight. You build with it. You let the heavy thing do the work. I have thought about that sentence more than any sentence a person has ever said to me. You let the heavy thing do the work. I think she was talking about stone. I think she was also talking about grief, and about the husband she wouldn't name, and about the daughter she'd mentioned once. I think she had found a way to take the heaviest thing in her life and lay it course by course into something that would, eventually, keep the snow off her head. I'm not a poetic man, but I knew it when I heard it. It took her until the middle of October. I won't pretend it was easy or that it was always beautiful. There were bad days. There was a day a whole section of the corbel slumped while she was setting it, and 3 weeks of work came down in a slide of rubble, and I rode up to find her sitting in the wreck of it with her hands hanging between her knees, not crying, which was worse than crying. There was a day the rain came in and froze, and she went 2 nights without sleeping right because the tent flooded, and she got the cough that I didn't like the sound of, the deep one. There was a day, I'll be honest, there was a day I tried to talk her out of it. I sat on Dutch and I looked at her gray face and her wrecked hands and the mountain of work still left and the calendar running out, and I said, "Mara, come down to the valley. I've got a bunkhouse nobody uses. Spend the winter where it's warm. The rock'll keep till spring." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "If I come down, I won't come back up." "Maybe that's all right." "It's not all right," she said it gently. She wasn't angry. "It's the only thing I'm building. If I don't finish it, there's nothing." She looked up at the half-closed roof, the gap at the top still open to the sky like a wound that hadn't decided to heal. "I need there to be one thing in the world that I started and finished and nobody could take, just one. Then I can come down, then I can do anything, but not before." She picked up a stone, found its face, turned it, fitted it to the gap by eye in the way that still amazed me. "You go on home. I've got light left." I went on home. What else do you do? She closed the roof on the 18th of October. I know the date because it's in the notebook, the only entry I've ever made in there that isn't a number. Oct 18. Mara set the last capstone on Cole's roof, stood inside it out of the wind for the first time. She laughed. First time I heard her laugh. And below that, where 40 years ago I'd written "Poor woman doesn't know." I was the one who didn't know. She'd done it. A roofless ruin that the county couldn't give away for $9 was, by the 3rd week of October, a sealed stone room built into a mountain, walls 4 feet thick at the base, a corbelled ceiling that didn't have a single piece of anything in it that could rot or burn or blow away, a cave at the back that held the earth's own steady cool, and a small iron stove she'd packed up in pieces, and a chimney she'd run out through the one gap she'd left on purpose. It was, I understood at last, not a folly. It was the single warmest, most permanent, most weatherproof structure for 15 miles in any direction. A horse thief had built the bones of it to outlast the law. A widow had finished it to outlast the winter. We didn't know yet how good a thing she'd built. We thought we knew. We thought it would keep her warm, and that was already more than anyone had bet on. We had no idea who else was going to need it. The first storm came down off the Beartooths on the 2nd of November, early, even for here. I stood on my porch in the valley and watched the gray wall of it eat the mountains one ridge at a time, and I thought about the woman up at Cole's place, dry under a dead man's stone, and for the first time in a long time I didn't worry about her at all. It was everybody else I should have been worried about. The thing about a real storm, not a weather report storm, a mountain storm, is that it doesn't behave like weather. Weather passes over you. This sat down on the valley like an animal making a bed, and it did not get up. It started the 2nd of November the way I told you, eating the ridges one at a time. By the 3rd it had buried my truck to the door handles and snapped the power line where it crosses the river bottom, which it does every few years, so I wasn't worried about that. I've got a generator and a wood stove and a deep freeze full of last fall's elk. I'm an old hand at being snowed in. You ride it out. You read the same 3 books. You talk to the dog. You wait. But this one didn't ease. That was the wrong part. On the 4th it should have started letting up. They always let up by the 3rd day, that's the rhythm of it, and instead the wind came around to the north and got worse. The radio, the little battery one I keep, started using a word I don't like, stalled. The system had stalled out over us. A high-pressure ridge to the east had locked it in place, the fellow on the radio said, in that calm, bored voice they use, and it was going to remain in the area for an extended period. Then he read off the school closures like that was the news that mattered. I went out to feed the horses in it on the morning of the 5th, and I couldn't see the barn from the house. 60 feet. I've lived in that yard for 40 years, and I lost the barn in 60 feet of white, and I'll tell you, that put a cold in me that the cold itself didn't. I got to the barn by the fence wire, hand over hand. The way you're taught and the way you forget you were taught until the day it saves you. Dutch and the other two were fine, packed into the lee, steaming and unbothered the way horses are. I broke their water and forked their hay and went back along the wire to the house, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I did a thing I hadn't done in years. I got out the notebook, and I made a list of everyone I knew who lived up high. Because here's what an old man knows that the radio fellow doesn't. A storm like that doesn't kill people in their houses. It kills them in their trucks. It kills the ones who moved, who thought they could make it to town for insulin or formula or a generator part before it closed in, and who got it wrong by 20 minutes. And it kills the ones who can't heat what they've got. Up County 7 there was a scatter of places past mine. The Dwyers, young couple, first baby, in a double-wide with electric heat and now no electric. Old Prute's nephew Cole, different Cole, no relation to the dead outlaw, just one of those names that won't leave a county squatting in a hunting trailer he'd winterized himself badly. And up at the very top, past the cattle guard, past where the road quits, in a sealed stone room with 4-foot walls and a cave at her back and an iron stove drawing clean, Mara. I sat there with my list and I understood, slow, the way you understand a thing you don't want to. That of every soul up that drainage. The one I'd tried to talk down to safety in October was the only one who was actually safe. I tried the phone, dead of course. I tried the CB, static. The snow was so heavy it ate the radio. I stood at my window looking up the white throat of the valley toward where her place was, 15 miles and 3,000 feet of impossibility away, and there was not one single thing I could do for anybody. That's the part nobody tells you about being snowed in. It's not the cold. It's the helplessness. It's standing in a warm kitchen knowing people you know are in trouble you can't reach. I want to be honest about this part because the story usually gets told like I was some kind of help. I wasn't. I was a 68-year-old man stuck in his house. Everything that happened up at Cole's place that week happened without me. I only know it because she told me after in pieces over a winter of coffee in that flat voice she used when a thing had cost her something. I'm going to tell it the way she told it. I'm going to try not to improve it. She didn't know the road had closed. Why would she? She'd never had a road. For Mara, the storm was almost, and she was ashamed of this, she said. Ashamed of how good it felt, almost vindication. She'd built a thing to keep out exactly this, and now exactly this had come, and the thing was working. The stove drew. The cave held its even cool, and the stove warmed the stone, and the stone gave the heat back slow all night long, so the room never swung cold the way a wood frame place does the second the fire dies down. She had the deep silence of 4 feet of rock between her and the wind. She could hear the storm, but only the way you hear an argument in another building, a muffled fury that had nothing to do with you. She had food, not a lot but careful. She'd spent her last real money in October on the unglamorous things, the things a person who's been truly broke knows to buy: rice, beans, oats, lard, a case of canned milk, salt, a sack of flour, coffee, calories that keep. She had snow for water, all she could ever melt. She had wood she'd cut and split and stacked dry in the cave through September because she'd known. She'd always known the storm was the whole point. So the first 3 days, she told me, were the best days she'd had in 2 years. She sat in her finished room, finished, the word still new in her mouth, and she listened to the storm fail to reach her, and she felt, for the first time since whatever had happened to her had happened, like she had not been a fool. Like the $9 had been the smartest money anyone ever spent. I kept touching the walls, she told me. I know how that sounds. I put my hand flat on them in the dark. They were warm. Stone I'd laid was warm. I'd take heat off the wall with my hand and I'd think I made a warm thing out of a cold thing, out of garbage, out of $9 and other people's leavings. She looked at her hands when she said it. I hadn't made anything good in so long. On the 4th night, somebody beat on her door. The door was the one piece of wood in the whole place, a salvaged slab she'd hung in the one opening, with a stone lintel over it that weighed more than she did. When the pounding came, she thought first that it was the storm. A branch. The wind finding a new way to be loud. Then it came again, and it was a fist, a human fist, and under the wind a voice was screaming a word she couldn't make out. She opened the door into a wall of snow, and a man fell through it. It was the Dwyer husband, Tyler, 26 years old, and she didn't know him from Adam, had never laid eyes on him. But he fell across her threshold caked white and shaking so hard he couldn't get words out in order. Behind him, when she got out into it, was the rest of it. Their truck, dead, nosed into the drift maybe 200 yards down the slope where he'd run it off County 7 trying to do the thing that kills people, trying to move. And in the truck his wife, Casey, and the baby, the 4-month-old. They'd lost their heat the first night when the power went, and they'd burned through their firewood by the third, and on the fourth, with the baby's lips going a color that no parent can sit and watch, they'd done the math that wasn't really math at all. It was just love and panic, and they'd loaded into the truck to try to break out to town. They'd made it half a mile up the wrong direction before the drift took them. Tyler had seen her chimney smoke, the one thing in all that white. A thread of wood smoke coming up out of a mountain where no smoke had any right to be, and he'd walk to it because it was that or watch his family freeze, and he'd had no idea, none, what he was walking toward. A stranger's smoke. He'd bet 3 lives on a stranger's smoke. She didn't tell me she thought about it. I asked her once, careful, whether she'd hesitated 3 more people, a baby in a room she'd built for one, on food she'd counted out for one through 5 months of winter, and she gave me a look I won't forget. There wasn't a thing to think about, she said. You don't think about it. There's a baby in a cold truck. You go get the baby. So she went and got the baby. She and Tyler went down the slope on a rope she ran off the door, her instinct, the mason's instinct, anchored to the heavy thing, and they got Casey and the baby out of the truck and up the rope and through the door into the warm stone. And Mara, who had food counted out to the day for one person, put more wood on her stove and started melting snow for the bottle. And she did not, she said, let herself look at the rice sack. Not once. I just didn't look at it, she said. Some problems you solve by not looking at them yet. The baby came back. That's the thing she'd remember, the thing she told me about with her voice going careful. Casey held it against the warm wall, against the stone, and Mara built the fire up, and the room came up to a heat a wood frame place in that storm could never have held. And somewhere in the small hours the baby's color came back and it started to fuss. And a fussing baby is the best sound in the world, she said, because a fussing baby is a baby with strength to spare. She nursed it against my wall, Mara said. Dead Ezra Cole's wall, the horse thief's wall. A 4-month-old's first winter, and she lived it through against a wall a murderer laid to hide from a posse. She shook her head. I don't believe in much, but I believe a thing can be made over. I believe that. I've got proof. 3 days the Dwyers stayed. There was no leaving. The storm had its teeth in, and County 7 was gone, just gone. The road a memory under 8 feet of drift. So 4 people and a baby lived in a room built for one, and they ate Mara's careful rice, and the rice sack got lighter than her arithmetic had ever planned for it to get, and she didn't say a word about it. And that's the morally heavy decision nobody puts in the title. The title says the shelter saved lives. It did. But a shelter doesn't decide to share its food. A shelter doesn't choose to run its own larder down to nothing for strangers it met when they fell through the door. A person does that. She did that. The stone just held the warmth. She held everything else. I knew none of this. I want to keep saying that because the way these stories get told, the old rancher always knew, the old rancher always rode to the rescue. I was in my kitchen. I was looking up the valley at nothing. On the 6th day I made another bad list of who I'd have to dig out for and in what order when I could move, if I could move, and I want to tell you what's on a list like that. It's not heroic. It's grim. It's a man deciding in advance in his warm kitchen who he thinks he can still reach in time and who he's already given up on. I had Mara at the bottom of that list, not because I cared least, because I decided she was the one I could afford to reach last. I decided she'd be fine. I was right that she'd be fine. I was wrong about why, and I was wrong about everything that mattered, which is that while I sat making my coward's arithmetic, the woman I'd tried to talk down off the mountain in October had become, without a road or a phone or a single other soul to help her, the only thing standing between 3 more people and the cold. There were 2 more comings that week, before the storm broke. The second was the nephew, the other Cole, Prute's kin, the one in the badly winterized hunting trailer. His trailer's heat was a propane wall unit, and on the 5th day it quit. The regulator froze the way they do, and he was a proud, dumb, half-feral young man who'd have died before he asked a soul for help on a normal day. But the storm doesn't care about your pride. You got cold enough, the kind of cold that starts lying to you, telling you you're warm, telling you to lie down, and somewhere in that lying cold the animal part of him remembered there was smoke up the mountain. Everybody'd seen the crazy lady smoke, and he walked to it the way Tyler had. Stumbled into the same door, fell into the same warm stone. And Mara, who now had 4 people and a baby in a 1-person room and a rice sack she'd stopped letting herself look at, opened the door and took in a 5th. He cried, she told me of the nephew. When he got warm, grown man, mean as a snake, the kind of boy who'd have spat at me in the feed store. He got warm and he put his face in his hands and he cried and he kept saying he was sorry, just sorry, sorry, over and over, and I don't think he even knew what he was sorry for. The cold. Being alive when he'd half decided not to be. I made him eat. He ate like he hadn't in days, which I expect he hadn't. The third coming was the one that broke her. The one she could only tell me about once, and never again, and I'm not going to tell it the way the title wants me to, all uplift, because it wasn't. The third set of headlights came up County 7 on the 6th night late, and they came too fast, and they came wrong, slewing, the engine racing, somebody driving the way you drive when you're already losing. They saw the smoke too. Everybody saw the smoke. It was the only thing to see in the whole white world. But these ones were already too far gone when they aimed for it, and the truck went off the road not 200 yards from where the Dwyers had, into the same drift, and by the time Mara and Tyler and the crying nephew got down the rope to it. I'm going to leave that there, the way she left it. She told it to me once in February, with the dawn coming gray through the one window she'd cut, and at the end of it she stopped talking and we sat there a long time, and she never told it again and I never asked. I'll only say this, they saved 2 of the 3. And the rice sack, by then, was a fist of grains in the bottom of a cotton bag, and there were 6 living people and a baby in a room built for 1, and the storm was still going, and Mara Kessler, who'd bought a ruin for $9 because she needed there to be one thing in the world she'd finished that nobody could take, sat in the warm dark of the thing she'd built, holding a stranger's baby so its mother could sleep, having just learned that you cannot save everyone, and that the warmest, strongest, most finished thing you ever made in your life will still, sometimes, only be able to hold the ones who reach the door in time. The wind came around to the south on the 7th day. The radio fellow said the ridge is breaking down in his calm, bored voice, like it was a fact about the sky and not a verdict about who got to live, and the snow eased, and then it stopped, and the sun came up over the Beartooths on the 8th morning onto a world so white and so silent and so completely changed that you could not find the road, or the fences, or any line a human being had ever drawn on the land. I got Dutch out on the 9th. It took me the whole day to make 4 miles, breaking trail through drifts that came to his chest, and I want to tell you I was riding to the rescue, but the truth is I was just riding to find out, to learn the size of what we'd lost. I got as far as the Dwyer place and found it empty and dark, and my heart went straight down through the snow. An empty house in that country after that storm is the worst thing you can find, and then I saw it. Up the mountain. Past the cattle guard, past where the road quits, up where a roofless ruin had sat for 110 years that the county couldn't give away for $9. Smoke, a clean thin thread of wood smoke, rising straight up in the dead-still morning air out of a mountain. And under it, faint, carried down the cold quiet, I swear to you, the sound of a baby crying. I sat on that horse in all that white, and I did something I am not ashamed of and would not tell most men. I took off my hat. I don't know to what. To her, I think. To the smoke. To a dead horse thief who built good walls and a broke widow who finished them, and to whatever it is in a person that makes them open a door in a storm to a stranger when they've barely got enough for themselves. Then I put my hat back on, because it was cold, and I pointed Dutch up the mountain to go see who was still alive. I got Dutch up the mountain on the 9th day, and I will tell you what I found, and then I'll tell you the part it took me all winter to learn, because the finding came first but the understanding came slow, the way understanding always does with me. What I found was a room that should not have held what it held. I'd been inside Cole's place in October when it was just hers, and it had been snug then, a good warm box of stone with one woman and her stove and her sack of rice and her careful little life. Now I ducked through the low door into a heat like a held breath, and there were people everywhere. The Dwyers in the back corner against the cave wall, the baby asleep on a folded coat. The nephew Prout's mean half-feral kin, sitting up against the stone with a blanket over his shoulders, and when he saw me come in he didn't sneer, which from him was a kind of weeping. A man I didn't know, 50 maybe, sitting very still by the stove with his hands wrapped around a cup and his eyes 1,000 miles away, not seeing the cup, not seeing anything. A young man next to him, hurt, with his arm in a sling Mara had made out of a flour sack. And Mara in the middle of it on her feet, moving, feeding the stove, turning a pot, putting a hand on a shoulder here, a word there, the way a person does when they have been the one holding a thing up for so long that they've forgotten how to set it down. She looked like 10 miles of bad road. She looked like she hadn't slept since October. She had a smear of ash across her cheekbone and her hands were worse than I'd ever seen them, cracked open at every knuckle. And when she turned and saw me standing in her doorway with snow melting off my hat, the look that went across her face was not relief. It was shame, the strangest thing. For just 1 second before she covered it, Marakessler looked ashamed, and I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. It was the look of a person who had not been able to save everyone, standing in front of the first witness to come up the mountain. She thought I'd come to count. She thought I'd come, like the county, like the world, to do arithmetic on what she'd managed and what she'd lost. How many? I said. Not are you all right? Not thank God. I said how many because I'm an old fool with a ledger for a heart, and it's the only question I knew how to ask. 6, she said, and then after a long beat in the flat voice, 6 and the baby. I did the arithmetic she'd been afraid of. The DWYERS 3. The nephew 4. The man by the stove and the boy with the sling 6. And I knew I'd seen the third set of headlights worth of trouble already. You can read a wreck from the trail. The way the drift was carved and dug, I knew there'd been more than 6 come up that mountain. And the others, I said. She looked at the man by the stove who hadn't moved, who had not once acknowledged that anyone had come through the door. We got 2 of the 3 out, she said, very quietly so he wouldn't hear, though I don't think anything cold reached him where he was. His daughter, she stopped. She started again. We couldn't, the truck was all ready. She stopped a second time, and this time she didn't start again, and her jaw worked, and her cracked hands closed and opened, and she looked at me with everything she had left in her eyes, and she said, I built a warm place. I built the warmest place on this whole mountain, and I still couldn't. Mara. I said her name the way you'd put a hand out to stop someone from falling. Don't, she said. Don't tell me I did good. Don't you dare. There's a man sitting by my stove who will never be warm again, and you're going to stand in my house and tell me I did good. So I didn't. That's the part I got right, maybe the only part. I didn't tell her she did good. I took off my hat and I came in and I sat down on the cold stone floor with the rest of the saved, and I shut my mouth, and I let the warmth of the walls she'd built come into my back, and after a while I got up and helped melt snow, because that was a thing a person could do, and the thing a person can do is usually better than the thing a person can say. The man by the stove was named Gerald. The boy with the sling was his son, and the daughter, the one in the truck, the one they couldn't get to in time. Her name was Hannah, and she was 23, and they'd been trying to get her down to town because she was the one who'd seen before anyone that the baby in the other truck. No, I have that wrong. I keep getting the order wrong because the order doesn't matter and the heart wants it to. Here is what's true. They were a family trying to get out of the storm, and they got it wrong by minutes, the way you do, and the mountain took one of the three and gave back two, and the two it gave back would carry the one it took for the rest of their lives. That's all. That's the whole terrible simple thing. Gerald didn't speak for 2 days. Then on the third day, Mara told me he started talking, and once he started he couldn't stop, and what he talked about was Hannah. Not her death, never that, he couldn't go near that, but her. What she was like. The way she laughed. That she'd just finished her nursing degree. That she'd been the one in the truck saying, "Dad, follow the smoke. There's smoke. Somebody's up there. Go toward the smoke." That the last useful thing his daughter did on this earth was point her father at the thread of wood smoke coming off Mara's stone roof. The smoke that saved her father and her brother. The smoke from the chimney of a ruin, a widow built for $9. Mara listened to all of it, hour after hour. That was the thing she could do that I couldn't, the thing none of us could do. She sat with that man and let him give her his daughter piece by piece, because he had to put her somewhere, and Mara was the one who'd held the door. I didn't say anything, she told me. What is there to say? I just kept the fire up and I let him talk. I figured the least I could do, the literal least, was know her name. So somebody who wasn't blood would know Hannah's name. So she'd be carried by one more person than just the ones who couldn't bear it. I didn't understand that winter why she sat with Gerald the way she did. Why a woman emptied out to nothing would pour what little she had left into a grieving stranger. I understand now. It's the part with the daughter. It's the part she'd never named. She told me about her own daughter in February. I told you that. The gray dawn coming through the one window, the only time she told the worst of it. Her name, Mara's daughter's name, is Ruth. She's alive. I want to be clear about that because the way the story wants to go is that the daughter was dead, and that's why Mara couldn't save Hannah, and that's too clean and it isn't true. Ruth is alive, somewhere in Oregon, and the last time she'd spoken to her mother was at the funeral of Mara's husband, Ruth's father, 2 years and some months before the $9. He'd been sick a long time. The husband. That was the thing that ate the money, the house, the life, not a sudden loss but a slow one, the kind that bankrupts you in your body before it bankrupts you in your bank. Years of it, and Mara had nursed him through every day of it with her stonemason's hands until those hands had forgotten they knew how to do anything but care for a dying man. And at the end of it there'd been a fight. The kind families have. The kind that's never about what it's about. Ruth had wanted something done one way at the end, and Mara had done it another. Or Mara had wanted help, and Ruth had been too broken to give it, or both, or neither. I never got the shape of it exactly, and I don't think Mara had the shape of it either, because those fights don't have shapes, they have wreckage. But the wreck of it was this. Ruth had said a thing at the funeral that you cannot take back, and Mara had said a thing back. And then there'd been 2 years of a silence as wide as this whole white country, and a widow alone with hands that had forgotten everything except how to hold on to something that was leaving. That's why I bought the rock, she told me in the gray February light. I know how it looks, crazy woman, $9, a ruin, but I'd lost the house and the man and the girl all in about 18 months, and my hands didn't know what to do, and I thought if I could just make one thing that would stay, because everything I'd ever made had left. She turned her cup in her cracked hands. And then the storm came and I found out what it was for. I thought I built it for me. I built it for Hannah's father. I built it for a baby I'd never met. I built it for a boy who cried by my stove. She was quiet a while. I built a place where somebody else's child could be saved, and couldn't save her, with my own daughter not speaking to me. She looked up at me. You tell me what that's the lesson of, because I've been sitting in this rock all winter and I can't find it. I didn't have it. I still don't. I'm not a man who finds the lessons in things. I'm a man who writes down the prices. But I'll tell you what I said, because it's the only wise thing I think I've ever said in my life, and I only said it because I'd run all the way out of foolish things first. I said, maybe it's not a lesson. Maybe it's just a door you opened. You don't have to know what it means. You just have to have opened it. She didn't answer me, but she didn't argue either, and from Mara that was practically a hymn. The storm let everyone go, eventually, the way they do. The county got a plow up County 7 by the middle of November, and the DWIRS went home to their cold DOUBLEWIDE, and I loaned them my generator till the power came back. The nephew went back to his bad trailer and, I'm told, fixed the regulator the right way, and has not to date spat at anyone in the feed store, which the whole county considers a personal miracle. Gerald and his son went down the mountain to bury Hannah, and I went to that funeral, and Mara went, and she and Gerald stood next to each other at the graveside not saying anything, two people who'd shared a stove for 6 days, and when it was over he took both her wrecked hands in both of his, and he didn't say thank you because there's no thank you for that. He just held her hands a long minute, and then he let them go. And word got out. That's the thing about a county like this. There's no such thing as a private survival. By Christmas the whole valley knew the story of the woman up at Cole's place, the $9 ruin, the smoke you could see for miles. The 6-cent baby she'd kept alive in a horse thief's hole through the worst storm in 40 years. It got into the county paper. Then a bigger paper picked it up. Then, the way things travel now, it left the paper entirely and went where I can't follow it, into the phones, into the air. She bought a Crumbling Outlaw's shelter for only $9, and when winter hit it became a lifesaver. And 1,000 strangers who will never break trail behind a horse in their lives shared it and felt good and moved on. I have feelings about that I won't get into. The story they told wasn't wrong, it just wasn't the story. The story isn't that a cheap building turned out to be useful. The story is a woman with empty hands who decided not to look at her rice sack. The story is Hannah saying go toward the smoke. The story is a man holding 2 cracked hands at a graveside. You can't share that. It doesn't fit. So they shared the building instead, and the building's a fine thing. The building saved lives, but the building didn't decide anything. And the deciding is the only part that ever mattered. But here is the part the strangers gave back, without meaning to, and I'll be grateful to them for it till I die. The story traveled far enough that it reached Oregon. It was April when the truck came up the valley. Late April mud season, the snow gone to brown rot in the ditches and the first green just starting to lie on the south slopes like a rumor. I was out fixing the winter's damage to my fence, which is what April is for, and I saw a truck I didn't know come slow up County 7, an out-of-state truck, careful, a stranger's truck looking for an address that doesn't have an address. It stopped at my gate and a woman got out, maybe 30. And I knew her before she said a word, because I'd been looking at her mother's face all winter. The same jaw, the same way of standing like she was braced for a thing that hadn't come yet. I'm looking for the stone place, Ruth said. Where there was a story, my mother, I think, is it real, is she? It's real, I said. She's up there, past the cattle guard. You'll have to walk the last mile, there's no road. And then, because I'm an old fool and couldn't help it, she built it herself, every stone, with her own hands. Something went across Ruth's face when I said with her own hands, something that 2 years of silence had been built on top of, and that the words her own hands went straight down through, all the way to the bottom. And she put her hand over her mouth, and she nodded fast, not trusting herself. And she got back in the truck and drove to the cattle guard. And I watched her start up the deer trail on foot toward the smoke. The way they all came. The way every single one of them came. Walking up a mountain toward a thread of wood smoke, not knowing what they'd find. I didn't follow, it wasn't mine to see. I'll tell you the little I know, and then I'll stop. Because the rest isn't mine and some of it I'll never know, and that's right. That's how it should be. I know Ruth stayed 3 days that first time. I know there was no road and they had to walk everything up, the way Mara had walked everything up in October, and I like to think there's something in that, a daughter carrying her own weight up a mountain to her mother, 1 mile on foot, because there's no easier way and the no easier way is the point. I know it wasn't fixed. You don't fix 2 years of that in 3 days in a stone room. Mara told me later in her flat, careful voice that mostly they didn't talk about it at all. That Ruth helped her clear the spring's rockfall and they laid stone together. Ruth doesn't know stone, but Mara taught her, the way Mara had been taught, find the face, let the heavy thing do the work, and that there's a section of the south wall now, a low retaining wall holding back the slope, that her daughter's hands helped build. It's not good work, Mara told me, and she was almost smiling when she said it, that almost smile that cost her everything. Her courses are crooked. I'm going to leave them crooked. I'm not fixing 1 stone of it. I know Ruth's gone back to Oregon for now. I know she's coming back in the fall. I know there were words said up there in the stone room, in the smell of wood smoke and old rock and new mud, that I will never hear and don't want to, between a woman who couldn't save someone else's daughter and the daughter she thought she'd lost. And I know that whatever was said, it was said inside 4 feet of stone laid by a horse thief, finished by a widow, that the county couldn't give away for $9. Here is the last thing. Here is the thing I came all this way to tell you. I asked Mara in the spring before Ruth came, I asked her if she regretted it. The whole thing. The $9, the killing work, the storm, the people, the one she couldn't save, all of it. If she'd known in October what it would cost her, would she still have raised her hand in that courthouse basement and said 9 like it was a real number? She thought about it a long time. She has cracked hands and a face the wind has finished its work on, and she'll never make money, and she lost someone's daughter in a snowdrift, and she may yet lose her own again. And she looked up the mountain at the smoke coming off the thing she built, and she said, I've started to write it down a dozen times and I can't get it right, and I've decided maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe some things you carry up the mountain yourself, on foot, because there's no easier way, and the no easier way is the point. Maybe an old man with a ledger isn't meant to have the last word on what a place is worth. I'll only tell you that she smiled when she said it, the whole smile, not the almost one. And that the smoke kept rising, straight and thin and clean, into a sky that had finally let go of the snow.